I sense a shift in the United States, a shift against Kamala Harris, despite all that media hype after she replaced Joe Biden as the Democrat candidate in the November election for president. It's not just a new poll suggesting Donald Trump is edging ahead in critical states that will tip the election his way. The other day, the Teamsters Union, America's most famous working class union, it's backed every Democrat candidate since Bill Clinton, but this time said no, it won't back Kamala Harris. It polled its members and found that nearly 60% of its rank and file actually preferred Donald Trump. Meanwhile, Harris is struggling to escape the burdens of what has been her past radical left policies, like this video that's re-emerged of her chanting against deporting illegal immigrants.
Down, down with deportation! Up, up with education! Down, down with deportation! Up, up with education!
She wouldn't dare say that now. Then there's Harris's terrible media performances, the few she's actually dared to give. I mean, showed you last night how she bombed in the love even that Oprah Winfrey threw for her, unable to give straight answers. And now there are signs of panic in her camp. For a start, it's now Harris demanding a second debate with Trump, like she really needs one now. And there's something else. Every election campaign, the two candidates go to the Al Smith dinner to raise money for Catholic Charities for Children in New York. It's a big deal as the candidates sort of trade jokes and show their heart. Well, Trump is going to this year's dinner like he did in the last two campaigns, but Kamala Harris has said no. Joining me is Sean Spicer, the first White House spokesman for President Donald Trump. Sean Spicer, good to see you again. How could Kamala Harris say no to the Al Smith dinner?
Well, unfortunately, the same way that she's been saying no to all these other journalists and the requests for interviews, the way that she has said no to so many things that are traditionally part of the process. That's why, I mean, I know that we like to in America say that this is a historic race, but it is unconventional and untraditional. And because she has the media on her side, Andrew, she gets away with stuff like this. I mean, the reality is that this dinner may not seem like a big deal to a lot of people outside the political beltway, but it was a time-honored tradition in America where people put aside their differences to come together one night and have sort of good humor and a fun time, showing the American people that despite differences, they could actually sit at the same dais and have an enjoyable evening. And for her to just so glibly say, I'm not going to be here because I'm going to be off campaigning, it's not even like she had an event and said, oh, I'm double booked that night. She just literally said, I'll be off campaigning. It's a big snub to tradition. It's a big snub to Catholics. By the way, it is a charity fundraiser for Catholic charities. So it's a big deal for the people who benefit from that. And it's unfortunate, but sadly, Andrew, over and over again, we've seen since she entered the race that she gets a pass that no other candidate in history has ever had before, and I don't think we'll have again.
Yeah, Sean, but you know what the problem is with these things? They are very exposing. You've got to be funny, you've got to be charming, you've got to show a little self-deprecation, wit, and all those things I think are, well, she can't deliver, and it's a high-risk thing for her to go to. I think that is the bottom line here.
And you just put your finger on it. For all these people who think she should be out there doing more interviews, doing more speeches, doing things that show a certain side to her that they want to see, her staff knows she's incapable of doing it. That's the dirty secret. It was the same thing with Biden, but for different reasons. When people kept saying he should be out there more, he should do town halls, he should do this. It wasn't that the staff didn't know it. They just knew his limitations. And for different reasons, the staff surrounding Kamala Harris knows the same thing. She's incapable of being unscripted.
Now, Sean, I've noted the astonishing result in the Teamster Union poll of members, the drift of some of the recent opinion polls now, particularly in the swing states, the signs of panic, like saying no to this dinner, for instance. How is her campaign going?
You know, it's an interesting question that you're asking because the national media in the United States loves to throw out these shiny nickels and say, look at this national poll. she's up by 4 points. Well, that's great, except we don't vote nationally. We vote by state. And right now, when you look at the path to 270 electoral votes, which is what you need to win, I did this on my podcast the other day. Donald Trump's got several paths to victory, several ways to get 270 votes. She doesn't. In fact, if she doesn't win the entirety of what we call the blue wall, that's Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, she loses. Donald Trump just needs to pick off one state. When you look at the state polls that just came up, Trump is up 4 or 5 points in Arizona. He's up 4 or 5 points in Georgia. He's up a couple points in North Carolina. He's doing what he needs to do. It's Kamala Harris that's on the defense when it comes to a path to 270 electoral votes. But the national media doesn't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the erosion in some of these other key demographics. For example, the Hispanic vote, she's up like 20 points. That's great on its face, except for traditionally, that's about a 30-point gap between the Republican and the Democrat. Donald Trump has closed it. So the national media is trying to create the perception through national polls and other things that don't matter that she's actually doing really well and trending in the right direction. But when you scratch beneath the surface and look at what actually will make a deciding factor as to who will be the next president of the United States, who will get those 270 electoral votes, it favors Donald Trump.
You know, at the Oprah Love-In, and I showed some of it last night, Sean, Harris was asked by members of the audience what concrete things would she do to stop illegal immigration? What concrete things she would do to cut the cost of living? In those questions, she didn't have any practical policy to put. I mean, she just had motherhood statements. It was so embarrassing. What policies has she put out in this campaign?
Well, very few, but let's go back to the example that you just highlighted, and I'm so glad that you did, because I've been doing this for 30 years, right? This is the number one issue that voters in America care about, not just the economy, but the cost of things, the cost of goods and services, of food. If you're her staff, if you're Kamala Harris, you know you're getting that question. That's number one every day of the week. And yet here she was again on that Oprah interview, flat-footed. And I'm thinking to myself, this was the gimme. You knew this was coming, and all you needed to do was throw out, 4 or 5 ridiculous policies to get through it, and everybody would have said, well, I don't agree with it, but at least I give her credit for it. She couldn't even do that. She just talks about, I sympathize with you and the middle class this, and that's not a policy.
And I think really there you've put your finger on something that I haven't mentioned about the shift away from her. I think there is that growing realization that it's all fluff, all bubble, and nothing of substance behind it. And that's coming out. The more she speaks, the more obvious that's become. Sean Spicer, thank you so much for your time.
You bet.